everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is Blois Olson. He's a political analyst and the publisher of Morning Take. Blois, thank you so much for joining me.
Happy to be here, Brittany.
I'm grateful for you coming on because you have been on a few times now trying to make sense of what we're seeing out of Minneapolis. And this time, over the weekend, we saw another person killed by federal agents in the city. This time it was the 37-year-old ICU nurse named Alex Pretti. He was fatally shot by multiple Border Patrol agents. So to start off the conversation, what is the mood right now in Minneapolis?
You know, the mood has just been dark and deep. I mean, you saw last week a peaceful protest of 50,000 people downtown Minneapolis. It was bitter cold, 20 below zero, felt like 30 below zero. Then on Saturday morning, all of that optimism of kind of peaceful civil rights-like energy shifted again to this idea that in the neighborhood where a lot of people go, it's actually called the Eat Street neighborhood. So tons of local restaurants, a vibrant neighborhood, and on a Saturday morning when there's a notable donut shop in that block, and a ton of people travel from all over the Twin Cities to go get donuts there. And so the idea that this happened in a place where people come to celebrate, I think really put a damper, not a damper, I mean, it just really was the latest blow to our city, our region, our state, that made everybody more angry, more upset, more willing to just push as hard as they could to, get federal agents to leave Minnesota.
And I think something we saw, especially in this incident, is we saw pretty much immediately, multiple versions and angles of the video of exactly what happened go viral, right? And you see Alex Pretti seemingly recording agents with his phone, right? He appeared to peacefully intervene in an altercation between agents and other observers. He was then pepper sprayed. Multiple agents jumped on him. And then within the span of just a few seconds, multiple shots were fired and he was laying there dead. People all saw this on the internet. People all saw this around the country and the world unfold. But what we heard from the administration was a different story. You heard DHS Secretary Kristi Noem describe it as an armed suspect reacted violently. He came onto the scene to inflict maximum damage. He was called by members of the Trump administration a domestic terrorist, things like that. And when you watch the video and then you hear what they're saying, I mean, the two aren't squaring up. Is that how pretty much everyone in Minneapolis feels right now?
Absolutely. I think anybody, you don't have to be in Minneapolis, you don't have to be in Minnesota. I think the country or the world saw that. And Brittany, I just want to pull back because I think this is one of those important moments that the democratization of media, the presence of phones on or cameras on our phone begins to show that you can't mislead the public. You have to be transparent and honest if you want the public to trust you. And I say that in the same way we watch politics, is that there's so much noise, but it's your own brain, your own eyes that is the real signal on what the truth is. And I want to just bring people back to 2024. It was Joe Biden's performance in that debate that made people see with their own eyes and hear with their own ears that he probably was in a different state than he was when he first got elected. And that caused Democrats a lot of damage. And that also is what we're seeing here. And that's where I think one of the political takeaways here is don't try to suggest something is different when nearly everything is on film these days.
I heard you in another interview talking about President Biden in that moment from 2024 in the presidential debate there. And up until that point, you've heard some in the administration, as well as some Democrats, defending President Biden, saying that's just a gaffe. He's could be a little older, but that's not him all the time. And then the American people see that debate and they realize, that wasn't just a cold. That wasn't just one bad night. It reminded a lot of Americans of the moment they've reached sometimes with a parent or grandparent where they need to have a sit down conversation with that person and say, maybe it's time to give up the car keys. But I do want to ask you, and I know that Republicans and conservatives in Minneapolis especially, they're not a monolith, but I'm curious if someone who supports ICE or a conservative there or a Republican. Is this a moment right now where they are thinking, hey, this isn't too right. Hey, I want to back away from this. This is too far.
I think there's a laundry list of people who are not traditionally Democrats. First, gun rights owners. Alex Pretti had a conceal and carry permit, totally legal in Minnesota, and never showed his gun. And so gun rights owners were saying, no, he did not show his gun. In fact, he operated properly. He did not show his gun. Had he shown his gun, that might have created something different. Second, I think what I read in accounts from the White House is that President Trump saw these videos too. And he saw them in real time. And he saw the people in his administration. And no matter what you think of President Trump, he made the call that this was just not matching up. And the pushback from other Republicans in Minnesota who had been saying for days, this isn't going well. This is hurting Republicans in Minnesota and across our country. And so I think there was some political reality that just required a shift. There was talks and conversations and negotiations about trying to change the tone in Minneapolis. But the killing of Alex Pretti changed the dynamic almost overnight, because you saw by Sunday afternoon, President Trump had signaled that things were going to be different. And so I do think the camera phone footage, the truth about the way it came out, and the administration's response led to a, we have to move in a different direction than we're in.
I'm wondering if the people of Minneapolis feel this sense of relief that there seems to be this change in tone from the weekend, because we saw the Border Patrol Commander, Greg Bavino. He was making the rounds, doing interviews. He was doing the Sunday shows. He didn't really seem to get this great reception, right? There was a lot of backlash to what he was saying. He said this looks like a situation where an individual wanted to do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement. And based on every video from every angle that we saw of Alex Pretti, I mean, that just wasn't the case. He was holding up his phone. It seemed like he was recording. He was turned away at the time when you do a freeze frame of the shooting. I'm curious, is there the sense of relief that he now is reportedly out of Minnesota, out of Minneapolis, and Border Czar Tom Homan is now in?
Tom Homan has been meeting with local leaders today, including the governor, the mayor, sheriff, et cetera. I think it's clear he's always been in law enforcement. He understands what local law enforcement needs. Behind the scenes, leaders in the community had been leaning on the White House to send Homan in for at least a week. And so the White House knew that that was one possible way to manage this. The other thing I would just say is that you asked if there's relief. I think today's probably the first day of a sigh, but there's still not relief. ISIS, the president, the governor have acknowledged that there would be a declining force here in Minnesota, but we don't have specifics yet. And there's some logistical and legal details to work out. So I want your viewers and listeners to know that people say Mayor Jacob Fry is not honoring the, federal government. Well, the reality is that these are county issues. So the city actually can't do anything because it's the county jail that has it. And we have 87 counties and we have 87 jails with different policies at the local level. And so you have to find a way to have consistency across those 87 jails if you're going to work with the federal government, which Minnesota has some work to do on.
And it does seem like now the state and local leadership is trying to get on the same page with President Trump and vice versa, because President Trump said that he talked to Governor Walz and he said that they seem to be on a similar wavelength. Walz said the call was productive. Mayor Fry said the president agreed the present situation can't continue. So based on that, do people feel that there is this off-ramp that's coming?
They do. There is clearly an off-ramp. I think there's many other kind of adjacent issues politically in Minnesota that I think are clouding the clear off-ramp right now. For instance, one of them was a demand over the weekend for Minnesota's voter rolls. The Department of Justice has done that before. There's only 10 states that have turned them over. A lot of red states have not turned over their voter rolls. So there's those distracting issues, Brittany. But I think from what I'm hearing on the ground today is that, Borders Homan is listening and trying to understand the complexities of the Minnesota situation and then trying to find a way forward.
And does that way forward include any type of federal agent on the ground? Does it include any type of immigration operation on the ground? I know, like I said before, the people of Minneapolis certainly aren't a monolith, but do they want all types of immigration agents out of the city?
No, I actually think that there is a band of folks in the middle. It's a narrower band than it probably was 2 months ago in Minnesota, but there's a narrow band in the middle that says if we have violent criminals, the so-called worst of the worst in Minnesota, we're okay with federal agents doing that, but work with local law enforcement or state law enforcement. The state corrections department says if we have somebody who's not a legal immigrant and they've committed a violent crime and the feds tell us they would like them for immigration, we'll turn them over. What's not happening is will state police or the BCA, as it's called here, assist ICE and federal agents in finding violent convicts from, that are not legally here. I think those are the nuances that we still have to figure out. I think those are the ways to do it. But I don't think ICE or Homeland Security is leaving completely. I think it's just going to be a significantly reduced force, and hopefully they'll operate in a more surgical manner rather than a broad, sweeping, intimidating manner.
You and I first talked when you broke the news that Governor Tim Walz wasn't running for a third term. And I'm curious what the political impact of all of this news is, because first I want to talk about the governor's race, because we saw a Republican candidate just yesterday drop out, attorney Chris Mantle. What do you make of that?
Look, he was a pretty straight shooter. He's a successful lawyer here. He ran as a Republican. He was a little bit of a disruptor in that race, but he assessed the situation and he assessed the way in which federal agents, ICE, the White House were handling the situation in Minnesota. He said they're violating people's rights. They're violating police officers' rights. They're violating citizens' rights. And he said, I can't stand for that. And if that means going through a whole campaign where I suddenly, because I'm running on the Republican side, have to defend the president or be MAGA, I just can't do that. So he dropped his campaign. The other side is that Amy Klobuchar, a U.S. senator from here, who's expected to run for Walz in Walz's place, has had to delay the launch of her campaign twice now because of these killings. The interesting thing, just for your viewers, which I think Forbes viewers will appreciate, is she co-chaired the inauguration last year. So she got to work with Susie Wiles, the Trump family, on the inauguration. There's always two congressional co-chairs. She was one of them. She had those relationships and she leaned in on them in the last few days to really try to bring this forward. And apparently she did. Finally, I would just say the other key issues for the state, I know, are ensuring that all of the evidence in the good killing and in the pretty killing is preserved so there can be a state-led investigation or a joint-led investigation between state and federal officers. I think that's where the line is. We need to investigate this as a state to know whether or not we can charge these officers locally.
And I know that even in national polls, some Republicans feel queasy right now. That was the word a pollster told me about ICE's actions. And Minneapolis, that's where it's all happening. So if I'm a Republican running for any office in Minnesota right now, what am I thinking?
I think it depends on what part of the state you live in. If you live in the suburbs, you're concerned about this. I think you saw suburban legislators, state senators here come out over the weekend and say, we need a pause. We need a different way forward, appealing to the president for that. I think if you're in a rural, mostly red district, this is not on the minds, but this is statewide. So I had on my radio show last week, a state rep from Wilmer, which is a very successful farming and food community west of Twin Cities, about 2 hours. In Wilmer, they have these same issues with ICE agents. Kids aren't going to school, parents aren't going to work, ethnic restaurants, Hispanic, Somali grocery store closed. Wilmer has been held out as a national model of making immigration work. and it has impacted these rural counties. So I know that out there you have a Republican state rep, safe Republican district, saying this is not good for our town. And I think there'll be more and more of that as people feel comfortable that there's a way out.
And then looking at what's next, and I know we can't predict at all, but when you look back at what happened to initiate this immigration operation in Minneapolis, it's all because, or it was largely born out of the fraud scandal that happened in the state's government. Is there any update on that? Because that is no longer in national headlines.
No, I think that's one of the things we're seeing here is that the fraud story is not a national story anymore, but it is still a local story. We expect it to continue to be a local story. And I think that was one of the reasons why, the Trump administration decided to send agents. But once they got here, they clearly were not focused on fraud. I know of only one place where they did a raid and took documents from what people thought was a suspected fraudulent business. But other than that, they haven't done that. And by the way, Republicans have kind of done it to themselves by pushing fraud off the front page, especially here in Minnesota. It was, only 3 weeks ago that fraud was probably the number one issue that got Governor Walz out of the race. And 3 weeks later, now we are here talking about the federal government's violation of Minnesotans' rights, their presence here, 2 dead citizens, U.S. citizens. And so the whole narrative of the campaign will likely be different here in Minnesota.
I mean, I can't even imagine that was only 3 weeks ago. It seems like we've lived 3 lifetimes since you and I first talked about that news. But I've asked you in the conversations we've had before, because this is such a national story, really an international story as well. But when you're from Minnesota, you're in Minneapolis, when you're looking at the coverage nationally, do you think anything's missing from the conversation?
I just think that there's an over amplification on video that's really good for TV and keeping people tuned in. So for instance, the last 2 nights, there's been 2 hotels total that had disruptors at it. But national media, some local media, but certainly online journalists, quote unquote, social media influencers have been there recording it like it's this biggest riot ever. And it's not. And so what I want the country to know is that for the most part, the state, the region is operating at full capacity. People are going to work, et cetera. Unless you are in one of these neighborhoods, you're an agitator, it's not there. So if you see a video, even the first weekend after Renee Good, there was, maybe 100 people. This is a metro area of 4.6 million people. It's a state with 6 million people. This is not the same as either the George Floyd riots of 2020, and it's certainly not the same as other places that we've seen this. So, if you're planning to come here for business, et cetera, you're going to be fine.
Blois, I really appreciate you breaking down exactly what's happening on the ground in Minneapolis. I hope that, temperatures cool down, calmer heads prevail, and you get a slow news cycle. Blois Olson, thank you so much for the time. I hope to talk to you again soon.
Well, Brittany, we could hope to talk again, but maybe it won't be just because of Minnesota.